size of a piece of carry-on luggage. You see it right there. Well, the FDA says it can be used in a doctor's office, a hospital, maybe one of those mobile testing sites, but the test can provide results in less than 3 minutes. Well, a warning heading into the holiday weekend. New York State's Department of Health calling for COVID precautions during the holidays and also for the people who are deciding to travel for spring break. Health experts say the best way to protect ourselves is to be vaccinated and boosted. Also suggest wearing a mask inside public spaces while around at-risk people. I'm Elizabeth Hashagen. Welcome to our live special report, The New Normal. This week, an influential group of U.S. experts recommended screening all children ages 8 and older for anxiety, saying the latest research supports early intervention for younger kids. Dr. Liz Mathias, a licensed clinical psychologist, certified school psychologist, joining us today to talk about just that and so much more. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me this morning.
I do remember we want to hear from you. So for the next half hour, we'll be answering your questions and also your comments or concerns. So if you want to share them, you can submit them right now under the live stream of the show on our Facebook pages. So we take a look at that recommendation, that age range. Do you think this seems to be spot on?
Absolutely. Sadly, our children are really struggling. We're starting to really see the negative impact of isolation and shutdown of the world, of schools, of activities, of friendships. And it's really coming to a head right now. And we're seeing a lot of children, adolescents, young adults who are struggling.
Right now, the CDC says more than 7% of children 3 to 17 have diagnosed anxiety. So what do you think the real number could possibly be?
I think the number is high. I think it's a very high number. I think with our younger kids, we're seeing more behavioral outbursts and just difficulty transitioning. Our elementary school age students are struggling academically, which is creating anxiety. And in addition to, they've lost a lot of social skills. Our high school students are learning how to be high school students and have their normal routines and go through all the things in transition for the next phase of their life. So there's a lot of time that has been lost, a lot of skill that's been kind of hampered or has been lost.
You know, when we talk about that routine screening for anxiety, for depression, who do you think should be doing this, and how could we possibly, that would be a massive undertaking to try to do?
I think between the schools and our pediatricians, because pediatricians tend to be our first point of contact as parents, is that whenever something is not right, our first reaction is to call the pediatrician. So pediatricians can do those screenings at well visits or even during visits when a parent brings in their child and says something is off. I think for our school counselors, when they notice a child is either increasing in behavioral outbursts or is becoming withdrawn or not performing as well academically, I think that's also a cue for our school counselors to assess what's going on.
You know, this is something that obviously we attribute so much of the feelings that we're having now to the pandemic, but this is something that's really been growing astronomically for some time, even before the pandemic. There was this February study done by the CDC that found 1 in 5 teenagers in the U.S. had experienced at least one episode of major depression, but the years were between 2013 and 2019. And in 2019, nearly 19% of high school students said they had seriously considered suicide.
You know, these rates are alarming, and they give me the shivers because we all have teens, and this is the age range of our children. What I think what has been happening over time is the demands that we put on our children, especially at the high school level, are ridiculous. They can academically, our children feel the pressure to be in high-level classes that have excessive levels of work, hours of homework in addition to extracurricular activities. I've seen several students in my practice in 9th and 10th grade, freshman and sophomore, who are coming in and telling me about how anxious they are in anticipation of college. And that's early. And just feeling the pressure from parents, from peers, from teachers to think about the future and making decisions about their future as freshmen and sophomores about what they're going to do for the rest of their life. It's a lot of pressure.
Sure. You know, we hear so much now about social emotional learning and, you know, it being really put into our schools, our elementary schools. I know, you know, for my son, he's 10. In his school, they have a book every month and the entire school reads it. And it's really, you know, things like self-awareness or interpersonal skills. And obviously it goes by grade level how each teacher, you know, interprets that. But how can we use social emotional learning in our schools to really support our children?
I think that pressure has always, or that responsibility, I should say, has fallen on our school counselors. But I think by making our teachers aware of it as well and incorporating into the curriculum opportunities to speak about our emotions and experiences and to have the freedom to do that, as opposed to it being something that you just do with your school counselor, but having that open communication on the daily or as close to daily, and teachers recognizing some of the signs, because our teachers spend a lot of time with our kids, sometimes more than our kids are spending time with us as their parents. So if they're seeing things and they're aware of the signs and they can speak to the counselors to do the screenings, but having those opportunities for discussion in every domain. So it's not just the school counselor handles this, the teacher handles this, which I understand is putting more responsibility on our teachers. But I think it's such an integral part because that's where our children are for the majority of their day.
And it's so true because, you know, we've been doing so, voluminous reports on education here on News 12 and speaking with so many teachers and administrators who are telling us about what's happening in these classrooms, the behaviors that are not grade level appropriate that they're seeing. And to that point, the American Psychological Association Task Force came out with some new figures, and I wanted to share them with everybody at home because it's unfortunate. I wouldn't even say shocking, but it's unfortunate. 6 in 10 teachers report that they experience physical violence or verbal aggression during COVID. Verbal aggression, more likely, they say, to come from the parents. The verbal aggression, in some ways is tougher, to manage because it is coming from those parents.
I think that it's a lot of pressure went on our teachers to do the best they can with very little resources and very little training on how to do this, on how many pandemics have we lived through. And then it put pressure on the parents who are trying to maintain their employment while also serving as teachers and aides to our kids. And so the response was, let the teacher handle this. But the teachers, they're working through a computer, and it became very, very stressful. And again, our teachers and our schools didn't necessarily have the resources. So it's so easy to be angry with the teachers and to say, you could be doing more. But what were they supposed to do? Everybody was very limited, and there was just a lot of pressure everywhere. Parents took on additional roles while trying to manage a household and a job, and it just became a perfect storm. And I know parents have reached out to teachers or even joined, a Zoom call and expressed their frustration and said, you need to do more. My child isn't learning, or they're not engaged. What can you do? And sadly, that's what the teachers have had to experience. And it's upsetting, but it's like the whole system became a pressure cooker.
Sure. And when we talk about that pressure, there's some new data out about stress. I want to take a look at this graphic for everybody at home so you can take a look at these numbers, because sometimes when you just say them, it's hard to digest. But it talks about the top sources of stress. And, if you look at the top there, that 87%, the rise in the price of everyday items due to inflation. And you think right now where we are when it comes to gas prices and, the bills that you have to pay, that's, a major stress. They say the supply chain issues, not being able to get, you look at the uncertainty, war, all these different things that are making this list, and how stressed out parents are, how stressed out people are right now, and then having to navigate the next thing that happens. And sometimes it can just seem like too much.
It's too much because parents are really facing a lot of pressures in terms of finances and what they can afford. And that pressure is going down to the children who are hearing, we can't do this, we can't take this vacation, or we can't buy this, or we can't do this as often as we did before. And there's just that before comparison, before the pandemic. And it's so unfortunate, and it adds that new layer of pressure, which means we really have to rethink how we want to live our lives and what's important and what's not important, and making amends.
And also how to deal with our stress so we don't take it out on the wrong person. And listen, I know I've been guilty of that and had to apologize and say, sorry, I'm actually stressed about something else and that just came out really mean. You know, because sometimes you just react because, you know, you've got this and it's just that one more thing that sets you off as that tipping point.
And as parents, we're going to feel that way. And our children, especially our anxious children, they personalize and internalize all our reactions and think that it's because of them.
Sure.
And I think you make a valid point by saying, hey, I'm stressed about something else that has nothing to do with you. Let me work through this and then I'll get back to you, but I apologize for snapping. And then that's also teaching our children how to navigate those strong feelings as well. So, you know, we can't come down on ourselves as parents because we're also human and
Right.
we feel a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure on us as parents right now.
Yeah. Julia wants to join the conversation saying she used to work as a school therapist for elementary school children and many were misdiagnosed with ADHD when the real issue was depression and anxiety. We need to do a much better job of providing mental health care in this country, especially for children.
So ADHD and anxiety sometimes look very similar, but for me, the differentiating questions for a child or a parent is the inattentiveness or the poor focus coming from being distracted by internal thoughts about what you're going to do later, the latest video game, or something that, you know, you heard in the hall, or something that was happening outside the window. That tends to be more inattention versus anxiety. The child is struggling with anxious thoughts. Am I safe? Is my parent safe? How am I going to do on this math test? What's going to happen during recess? Who am I going to play with? Is this person going to pick on me? So that's a differentiating factor there.
All right, up next, we're going to talk about college athletes and mental health as our conversation continues. And do remember, we want to hear from you. You can submit your questions or concerns on our social media pages. And if you or someone else you know is in crisis, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 800-273-8255. Hello to everybody on Facebook. I just saw your cat. What's your cat's name? No, I love that. I love it. What's your cat's name?
Simba.
You have to say it in that deep voice every time. Is that how you call the cat? Or you just...
Yeah, and then I hold him up and I say, guys, this is the king of our forest here, so.
Great. I love it. Okay, let me just check right now and see... Okay. Yeah, that's great. Do we have the new ones in or no? Okay. Can you tell me when you do so I could tell her so we know them? Okay, thanks. We have new questions, we just don't have them yet, but they're being matriculated right now. Okay. Do you want to tell me what it is? Okay, so somebody is saying that their daughter's anxiety is off the chart, so that's going to get added to the bottom of what we're talking about. You know, well, I don't want to say it's interesting, but it's happening, I guess. I notice kids in older ages using a lot of those fidget toys. Like, remember we had those like fidget spinners, but now there's like these pea pod things, and you know there's those little popper things that even people have on their keychains, and you know all these like fidget manipulatives, I guess, right? So is that something that is really good if you have anxiety?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a very anxious person myself, and I'm always fidgeting with something in my hand. And I find that it relieves a lot of that pressure of what to do with my hands. So I have a box of fidgets in my office, and when the kids come in, they know they can go and reach the box of fidgets. I'm constantly updating it with suggestions from my children, and they sit there and they fidget, and it facilitates just the conversation. We're sitting on a yoga ball, and they'll sit and they'll bounce on a yoga ball and they'll talk to me, or we'll walk around, we'll sit on the floor. Doesn't matter to me as long as they're feeling comfortable and a lot of their thoughts and feelings can come out.
Right.
Fidget away.
Yeah. Okay. Because I do see, you know, so much of that. I was like, you know, is that just like a trend or is that really helping? But they seem to be going away with it. So.
I think it's a trend, but it's helping. It's a helpful
Well, a
trend.
helpful trend would be nice, right? Usually the trends are unhelpful, and we're telling people not to swallow like dish soap or something. So I'm
Tide Pods?
yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yes. So I'm glad to know that that's not the case. Phil, how much time back? Thank you. All right, we're 30 seconds back now. So at the very top here, we're just going to start with that college information that I was telling you about from the American College of Sports Medicine. And, you know, Karen, is the tweet at the... Oh. Welcome back to Our New Normal, a special report here on News 12. We continue to answer your questions. So if you have them, you can submit them right now under the live stream of this show on Facebook. Dr. Liz Mathias, a licensed clinical psychologist, certified school psychologist, joining us today. And, you know, the issue of mental health, especially in athletes, really brought to life, you know, you saw it obviously with Simone Biles and Michael Phelps, Naomi Osaka, talking about the pressure, the stress, competition. But recently there was a college female lacrosse player who spoke out about the time that she took off the field and talking about some of the pressures that she was feeling, and wrote this open letter. This is from her Instagram handle, and she, you know, talked about experiencing these different stories and how people think that if you see someone who is happy, that's enough and they're okay. But she said, you know, if someone is acting happy doesn't mean they necessarily are happy. And she said especially, you know, teammates and players, that so much of it, you know, they put on this facade because they're trying to handle it. And really shining a light on what college athletes are you know, going through right now on college campuses, and, you know, also high school athletes as well, I'm sure.
Our athletes tend to be very high achievers that hold very high internal standards. So you take them to the field where now people are watching, you have your fans, you have your teammates, the coaches, and they feel a lot of pressure in addition to their own to perform at their absolute best, because they really struggle to tolerate any negative feedback. You know, they can take the feedback in terms of how to improve their game, but you're looking at a lot of young men and women who are already holding themselves to really impossible standards, and they don't want to let anybody down. So you talk about they're already dealing with these very high standards, and then they're holding themselves to even higher standards. Anxiety is inevitable.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to take a look at some of the numbers when it came to athletes. So I found that on college campuses in the U.S., about 30% of women, 25% of men who are student athletes report having anxiety. This was the data that was shared by the American College of Sports Medicine. But what stood out to me was among those athletes with known mental health conditions, only 10% say they seek care from a mental health professional.
Sadly, they do feel like that's a sign of weakness. If they need to go to someone and speak to someone about it, and they feel like they should be able to handle it on their own. Again, really, really high internally set standards of, I should be able to do this on my own. Let me put a smile on my face and work through this, and I can get through this, which is excellent resilience, but sometimes we just need help. Yeah. And that's okay.
Kitty says, what good does it do when youth treatment is so limited? Kids wait for months to be seen by the few child providers that are competent in treating anxiety, and even fewer who take insurance. The system is overloaded and broken, and our kids deserve better.
The system is overloaded as a result of COVID. I think prior to COVID, we were able to see a lot of children with a great deal of ease, and parents were able to have their choice. Because of where we are right now, every single practice, I know the practices around me, we all have waiting lists. And it is very frustrating to us as providers, because we want to reach out and we want to help children who come to us. And I can tell you from the provider side, it's equally as frustrating. And I know I'm always reaching out to other colleagues, asking who can take a child that I can't fit in. But you're absolutely right. It's an overwhelmed system, and I'm hoping that that will change soon.
All right, Mary says, is widespread childhood anxiety a new phenomenon? I'm all for early intervention, but if we are creating anxious children, shouldn't we do some research to figure out what is going on?
I think that's a good point as well in terms of, what are we doing as parents that may be creating anxiety inadvertently? Nobody is raising their children with the intent of making them anxious. But if we're anxious parents, it's important for us to have that awareness and insight so we can understand what language we're using when we're speaking to our children and how we're handling conflicts or injuries or anything like that. And really, as parents, being mindful of the words we're using or our emotional reaction to them, to help moderate those feelings of anxiety. And also, is childhood anxiety a thing? Yes, it's always been a thing. But that's something that we can help our children to develop coping skills, again, in private practice, in schools, at home. And that's really the model, is if you can manage these skills across all environments, there's greater rates of success.
All right, Sheena says, anxiety is worrying. I think social media use and the compare and despair effect of it is among the things to blame. When I was a teenager in the late 90s, I was relaxed. I fought bullies successfully. Just my 2 cents.
Social media is definitely a double-edged sword. I think the intent was to keep people connected, but you're right. It did become a place of comparison where young girls, young teens are looking at images and thinking they should look the same. And then what our children don't always know is that these images are very much edited. Mm-hmm. And so people don't look the same, and that people create scenarios and then portray that on social media. And so I always tell my own children, in addition to a lot of the teens that I work with, when you're out, look to see what kind of pictures are taken and what's going on social media, because I am positive that what was really happening and what you're seeing on social media are not the same. And they create these events, or these, this is my new BFF type of situation is created, but it's not accurate.
All right, Joel says, after this pandemic, we have this situation, speaking to anxiety, in the whole world.
We're anxious. There's a lot of unpredictability with the pandemic. Things that we could control and predict, things as predictable as I'm going to go to the supermarket or I'm going to go on vacation. All these things were taken away from us. How many times did we say, I want to plan ahead. I do better when I plan ahead. And we couldn't plan ahead.
All right, coming up next, we are going to continue our conversation on mental health and get to all of your questions and comments. Hello to everybody on Facebook. Phil, I just want to mention that during I don't know if we rectified it, but the clock was stopping. I don't know if that's like a technical thing or we knew about it. So I just was trying to be flexible at the time at the end there. But when it hit 5 minutes, it stopped moving. And then it started moving again. And then another time it got stuck kind of and didn't move right. So maybe just to make sure. Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, if there's a problem, totally, but you don't need to be at all, because yeah, great. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is that short 2-part section. Everybody on Facebook getting the behind the scenes there. We have the Sharon who said that her daughter's anxiety is off the charts, but we have a 2-part question comment from Ma. Yes, stress is a factor, but we can't ignore that substance abuse and use is another pandemic and is proven to be a catalyst for depressive disorders. Children as young as 9 are experimenting and using. As well, COVID causes protein deposits on the brain. This S1 spike crosses the blood barrier, and studies show that can cause depression and other neurological symptoms. Okay, so we'll probably have about maybe 30 seconds after that. Do you want me to do that one first? Liz?
Sure, let's start there.
Okay. So Karen, can you just put Sharon under Ma, just so I have enough time to, thank you. Yes, please. What's the time back? Thank you. Okay, we have 45 seconds back. Last time, right, I went to talk to you, they were like 3, 2. I was like, oh, just kidding. Okay, so we'll get to the two-parter right away. Obviously, substance abuse. Those numbers are just astronomical. And then we'll get to Sharon right after. 15 seconds now. Welcome back. We do want to jump right back into your questions. And Ma joining the conversation saying, yes, stress is a factor, but we can't ignore that substance abuse and use is another pandemic and is proven to be a catalyst for all depressive disorders. Children as young as 9 are experimenting and using. As well, COVID-19 causes protein deposits on the brain. The S1 spike crosses the blood-brain barrier, and studies show it causes depression and other neurological symptoms.
I think that's a two-pronged question. The first part being the medical effects of COVID and how it can create anxiety and depression. And if your child had COVID, or if you've had COVID and you're noticing an increase in anxiety and depression, that's definitely something to consult with your physician about, as medication may be helpful or other remedies. When it comes to children using substances, sadly, substances became a form of self-medication for trying to subside and quiet very strong feelings that couldn't be managed. So for children who you see are struggling in that respect, that really warrants a conversation with a pediatrician or a psychiatrist or neurologist to find prescription medication that can have that same effect, but every day, all day, and for it to be controlled and monitored. So our children are getting relief. And I think that's the biggest piece of it, is our children want relief. And so having the medication piece plus the therapy piece to work on coping skills together, then we're looking at really building those skills.
All right, and Sharon joining the conversation saying, my daughter's anxiety is off the charts, so our best to her. Thank you all for joining this conversation. You're watching The New Normal, a special report on News 12. Yay, thank you so much, Liz. It was so lovely to see you.
Likewise. I'm glad you're back.
Thank you. Good to be back.
All right. Have a great Easter.
You too.
Are your kids off this week?
Yes, they're off right now. I'm going to go home to pandemonium. I don't hear you, but bye. Happy Easter.